Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are very excited for our next installment of the Ecosystem-Based Fisheries Management series. A few logistics before we start. My name is Katie Rowley. I'm with the NOAA Central Library. We are the host today. This platform GoToWebinar sometimes has a few issues. If you can't hear or you can't see, the best advice I can give you is to close the program and log back in. If that doesn't solve your problem, you can always chat me, or you can email library.seminars@noaa.gov, and we will try and help troubleshoot the issue for you. We are accepting questions, but we will be holding those questions until the end of the seminar. So you can always put questions into the question panel or the chat box, and we will ask those at the end. And I believe that is all I have for logistics. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Peg Brady to introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Katie. Yes, this is Peg Brady from NOAA Fisheries. We're resuming our monthly series of EBFM seminar series, which our team initiated back in November 2017. And our main objectives for this series is to showcase the excellent projects that are being implemented to advance ecosystem-based fishery management, and to increase awareness regarding ecosystem-based fishery management, and to better understand how our marine ecosystems are responding to changes. And also to highlight some of our fishery staff. And today we're very happy to have Kalei Shotwell from our Alaska Fishery Science Center, who will be presenting ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles for fishery management decision making. As Katie said, NOAA Library has been our wonderful co-host on these series and continues to provide tremendous support for us. So thanks to Katie. These presentations are publicly accessible, recorded, and archived. So if you're interested in this series, we can direct you to the NOAA Library site to see past recordings. And of course, Kalei's presentation will be up within probably 24 or 48 hours of today. Following the presentation from Kalei, there's an opportunity to pose questions, which Katie will pose to Kalei. And if there are any detailed questions, we suggest taking them offline. And there's Kalei's email address, and you can have an exchange with her directly. And just a little bit of a commercial for our next one in November. We're happy to have Dr. Steve Murawski speaking on November 10th. We're doing that on Tuesday because of the Wednesday holiday. November 11th is a holiday, so November 10th, same time, Dr. Steve Murawski from the University of South Florida will be our speaker, and he will be focusing in on the ecosystem, an ecosystem lens for evaluating deepwater horizon impacts and effects on some restoration activities. So I hope you can join us on Tuesday, the 10th. So I'll turn it over to you, Kalei, and again, thank you for all your help and support in providing today's presentation.
Okay, thank you, Peg. Thank you, Katie. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, you are very clear.
Okay, perfect. All right, good morning. Well, afternoon, I guess, everybody, and thanks for having me on this. I'm here to introduce you all to, as Peg said, the Ecosystem and Socioeconomic Profile, or the ESP. So we'll start out with their definition. You see on the slide, an ESP is a standardized framework that facilitates the integration of ecosystem and socioeconomic factors within the stock assessment process, and it acts as a proving ground for use in management advice. Before I go any farther, I just want to say that there are many people involved in creating and running the ESPs at the Alaska Center. It's a huge group effort, and I want to thank everyone for the help and continued support. All right, a bit of background. I'm sure many of you have seen this nice figure from Dolan et al. That provides a visual for the continuum of ecosystem management. It starts with single species fisheries management at the bottom there and builds up to the overarching ecosystem-based management. For the most part, we've operated in this lower area of single species fisheries management, but we have a century-long legacy of qualitative reviews, conceptual modeling, retrospective studies, and they've all been focused on detecting mechanisms underlying ecosystem responses to improve stock assessments. And over the past several decades, we've also built up the capacity for including additional pieces of information through our major advances in ecosystem modeling. However, it's sort of remained unclear how this additional information fits into our fisheries management operations. So we have the data, we have the mechanisms, we have the models. What really seems to be the holdup? Generally, we have three disciplines operating within our council process. You have the stock assessment, ecosystem economic assessment, and fisheries management. In the North Pacific, on one side, we communicate with fisheries management through the stock assessment and fishery evaluation, or SAFE reports. And then on the other side, we communicate through the comprehensive ecosystem status or economic reports. I'm calling these ESRs. All these documents are created at nearly the same time and provided to the council to set the quotas. What we do not have is a clear pathway to understand how the ESRs translate to a stock-specific situation. We also do not have a standardized process for testing and vetting ecosystem linkages through scientific review within our decision-making process. So this kind of creates a gap in communication, and it may result in somewhat reactive strategies when, say, a crisis strikes. But we've been trying to change this. The ecosystem and socioeconomic profiles are a commitment to a process that allows for creating a proactive strategy in response to change. So here we're building on the rich history of identifying ecosystem pressures on stocks in our region and designing a framework that tests these linkages for providing advice. There are 4 steps to this process. In the first step, you start with a focused effort to review information from national initiatives on prioritization, vulnerability, and classification, and combine that with regional priorities to develop a list of priority stocks for producing ESPs. In the next step, you then move to grading a standard set of descriptive stock metrics, and then evaluate ecosystem and socioeconomic processes that drive the stock dynamics so as to develop a mechanistic understanding of the drivers for each stock. And that leads to defining a suite of indicators to monitor and analyze trends of these indicators using tests appropriate to the data availability of the stock. And then the process is completed with a standardized reporting template that's concise and conveys the status of the leading indicators to fisheries managers, and that's all done within our stock assessment cycle. So with that process, we also have the ESP product, and that's a standardized reporting framework also with 4 main sections. These ESP reports are included as an appendix to the main SAFE report, and the lead stock assessment authors are the main editors of the ESP, and they also determine how the results from the ESP are used in the SAFE documents. In the first introductory section of the ESP report, we provide the justification as to why we're doing the ESP. Generally, the ESPs are conducted to center or our council research priorities and recommendations. We also include a summary of the data used in the ESP with a table of data sources and references. And then the second section is a metric assessment where we review a set of baseline descriptive measures and discuss ecosystem and socioeconomic processes that influence the stock. The third section of the document is the indicators assessment, where we list the time series we monitor, provide up to 3 stages of analyses where it's relevant. And then we finish the document with a recommendation section that highlights the main takeaways from the metric and indicator assessment sections, and that can be used for decisions in the main assessment. We also, in that last section, provide information on data gaps and future research priorities. So on the right side of the slide, there's links to some of our current groundfish and crab ESPs for reference. So when you look at this presentation later, you can click on those links. And when you do go to the reports, you'll see from the front page of the documents, there's a large number of people involved in creating these ESPs, a lot of contributors and editors. So next I'll go through the 4 main sections in a little bit more detail and use Gulf pollock as our example. Generally, ESPs are conducted due to their center or council priorities. We also include information from multiple national initiatives, and that includes stock and habitat prioritization, the productivity susceptibility analysis, our climate vulnerability assessment, and stock assessment classification. Together, those initiatives provide information on the importance, vulnerability, and data availability for each stock. And then, so to the right, I'm showing an example from Gulf pollock for classification. In that initiative, the stock assessment authors provided a current and a target value for the data available on their stock, and then how it's used in the stock assessment. So as you can see, this is a 5 is a very rich stock, and a 0 would be no data. This is a data-rich stock with very few gaps, and also at the bottom in the ecosystem category, you can see there's a clear priority to include ecosystem data within the assessment. And then so after that justification section, we have a summary of the data that we use in the ESP. That will include a table of data sources, and that also has references and contacts in case you want to find out more about the data. So a little bit more, the second section is the metrics assessment. And we start with a simple qualitative evaluation of baseline metrics. These are just a set of standard descriptive measures of stock attributes that provides a first look at the stock with respect to other stocks in the FMP. So over the past several years, we've collected these measures for all our groundfish and crab stocks, and many of them were taken from the national initiatives that I mentioned in the previous slide. So again, on the right, I'm showing an example graphic of the baseline measures called, and we call this a metric panel for Gulf pollock. This summarizes how this stock scored from low to high value across a wide variety of attributes. Data quality is also included in the graphic through the shading, as some of the measures are not based on a lot of information. You can kind of think of this initial baseline evaluation similar to when you go and get a physical exam. So your doctor would check your pulse, your blood pressure, and whatnot, and the results would tell you if you fell within or out of a standard range. If your measures are flagged, then your GP might want to follow up with you in more detail on that. And this is a similar thing here, although this is more of an application to identify the unique traits of the stock, and then we'd explore those in more detail. In the case of Gulf pollock, the metric panel suggests that there's high recruitment variability, high commercial value, high ecosystem value as a prey or predator, and potentially high habitat dependence. Some of those measures have specific thresholds, such as the recruitment variability, where going above that threshold indicates a need to monitor that. And those are represented in the graphic by the red dots. And some are more qualitative, using scores like prey specificity, where a low score would mean the stock eats a large variety of prey, and a high score means that the stock's a specialist. And then there's measures like commercial value that just have a range amongst the stocks. A high measure highlights a more unique aspect of that stock that we should monitor. The metric panel attempts to put all these measures together so we know what attributes to concentrate on and what we should explore in more detail. And we do that in the more comprehensive processes and drivers section that follows the baseline metrics evaluation. The ecosystem processes section provides information by life history stage to identify bottlenecks and understand mechanistic relationships with the stock. The socioeconomic processes section provides information on fishery performance, economics, and community engagement. And that section stems from an economic performance report that was made by Dr. Ben Fissel with our economic team, and he's done that for many groundfish stocks. I also wanted to show an example of the conceptual model that we use in the ESP. This is again an example for Gulf pollock and provides a nice quick overview of the stock life history. Here we have the 7 different life history stages from an associated life cycle table. The conceptual model has the basic info from that table, but also includes depth and temp preferences, and then the major proposed processes that influence a given stage. The color is of the text there is the expected relationship to producing good, which are highlighted in blue, or poor, which are in red conditions for pollock. I also want to thank Erin Fedawa, who facilitates the crab ESPs, but she started this schematic for those stocks, and we've been using this for all the other ESPs. Following the metrics assessment is the indicators assessment, where we introduce the indicators suite, and that consists of time series proxies representing those critical processes and drivers that we identified in the metrics assessment. We're also generally seeking indicators that are accessible, consistent, and timely to use in the ESPs, and that makes them an act to follow. I like using my acronyms there. An example of the indicator suite is on the right again for Gulf pollock. The indicators are organized by categories, and they follow the general layout of the indicators shown in the ESR report cards, except we just highlight the most recent year with a green band. I'm not showing all the indicators for pollock here, just the beginning ones. The section also includes analyses of the indicators and is accomplished in 3 general stages. The first stage is a very simple traffic light on the current year of all the indicators. We have recently proposed a simple aggregate scoring option, and that's following a recent recommendation from our council. The second stage is a little more advanced, where we run indicator importance methods to establish, to estimate the relationship with a variable of interest, say recruitment. And the third stage is where we might provide output from a research ecosystem linked model run, and then we can compare that with similar output from our current stock assessment model. Then we use results from these analyses to provide context for management advice. I'll go through the categories of the indicators and the 3 stages in more detail. The ESP indicators ecosystem categories are laid out much the same way as our ESR categories. And basically, you have physics, phytoplankton, zooplankton, eggs, larvae, young of the year, juveniles, and adults. And then to the right, it's a list of different types of indicators that are currently used or proposed in the ESPs. You can see that there's many different data sources. Those are in parentheses, but they all fit into the main categories. I'll also note that the ESP teams do try to select the most representative and indicators and a similar number of indicators for each of these categories. And that's so like one category does not have more influence than another. That's also similar to what is done with the ESR top 10 indicators in our region. The ESP socioeconomic indicators are a little different, but they encompass more the fishery well-being, and that's through categories of fishery performance, economics, and community engagement. Again, to the right is a list of the different types of indicators currently used or proposed in the ESPs. It includes CPUE, effort, bycatch, ex-vessel value, price, TAC utilization, and then local regional quotients for community engagement. I also want to expand a little on the 3 analysis stages that are built into the indicator assessment. Stage 1 is a relatively simple evaluation by the traffic light scoring. This gets at the current year trends and it's relative to the mean of the whole time series, and it provides a look at the utility of, say, the whole indicator suite. Stage 2 uses importance methods, and that's related to a stock assessment variable of interest, like recruitment, biomass, catchability. We use simple regression techniques here and generally get output for indicator evaluation when this is run outside the stock assessment model. You can get at direction, magnitude, uncertainty of the effect, and inclusion probability depending on what method you use. Also, you can have simple predictive performance for that variable of interest. In stage 3, it's basically an ecosystem linked model run, and that can be compared with the current operational model to get information on retrospective patterns, prediction performance, and output from the model, such as, say, terminal SSB, main recruitment, etc. So now I'll show an example of the 3 stages using information from the Sablefish ESP. In the table to the right are the main ecosystem indicator categories, and we show a simple traffic light score for the most current year. And that's using the value being above, below, or within 1 standard deviation of the mean for the time series. That follows what they do in the ESR report cards. And then we add the colors of blue or red, which correspond to good or poor conditions for the stock, and white is stable. We then assign a +1, -1, or 0 to the indicator following the color-coded traffic light. And then we count all those up, divide by the total indicators, and evaluate that for all the categories and a total ecosystem or socioeconomic score. It's fairly simple. This can be done for any stock with a suite of indicators. I'm showing the score for the ecosystem indicators for Sablefish to the right. And potentially you can use this to score, the score to be evaluated for the ESP recommendations section or input to the risk tables, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, or for use in our council process for discussion. Our SSC also mentioned that this score could be used to take a historic look at the overall indicator performance. So here's an example of the scores for the total ecosystem and total socioeconomic categories evaluated for Sablefish over the past 15 years. And you can see that the switch in ecosystem indicators during the most recent years, all right, I hope you can't see that, recent years of high recruitment events and also subsequent downturn in the socioeconomic indicators when the prices of Sablefish were getting lower. This historic review helps see how the indicators are performing together. So stage 2 is an evaluation of indicators. Hold on a sec, my computer's freaking out a bit. Okay, sorry. Stage 2 is evaluation of indicators outside of the assessment model. We take the indicator suite and perform a simple importance analysis on the longer-term indicators. And these methods provide the magnitude, direction of the effect, an estimate of uncertainty, and the indicator inclusion probability and the relationship with that variable of interest. Several methods can be used to test these relationships. On the right, I'm showing an example using a Bayesian adaptive sampling technique, and that's to predict recruitment for sablefish. But you can also use boosted regression trees. You can compare these two methods and see if what the results look like. Those results can be used to weight the simple scores in the traffic light of stage 1, or for testing to be used in a model run, say as a standalone index, or to inform recruitment deviations. That information can also be used to set priorities for future exploration or research for this stock. So with the example on the right, for sablefish, the model shows that 5 indicators have potential to be incorporated into the model with an inclusion probability over 0.5. We could use the juvenile index from Fish and Game as a standalone in the model, or use the 5 indicators together to inform our recruitment deviations and lower the uncertainty. Finally, in stage 3, we could take the results of stage 2 and use those indicators directly within the assessment model. This stage provides an on-ramp for introducing an alternative ecosystem model to the current stock assessment model. And our SSC has recently recommended this as an ultimate goal of the ESP. In this stage, we can provide summary performance metrics from that ecosystem model run that can be reviewed and monitored to understand what you gain by including the ecosystem information within the model. You can show improvement with parameter estimation, forecasting. You can also provide decision tables on these performance metrics, and that you would be showing between the operational model and our ecosystem linked model. We somewhat did this with sablefish a long while back, where we examined the influence of the North Pacific polar front on sablefish recruitment. We generated an ecosystem model using several SST indicators along the path of that front, and that was to determine what might be most related to recruitment. In that analysis, wintertime conditions in the central North Pacific were highly related to sablefish recruitment, and we provided an analysis of the impact to the projection model, and we compared that with the current sablefish model. So that relationship has changed in recent years, and what we would do now is reevaluate it through the ESP and provide the comparisons between using those indicators within our model and the current ecosystem or the current operational model. So finally, the document ends with a recommendations section that provides an ecosystem and socioeconomic summary of the main takeaways from that metric or indicator assessment, and also included our summary results from the 3 indicator analysis stages. That can be used for decisions in the main assessment. And we have a data gaps and research priorities section, which provides information on issues with the current indicators, any data needs or improvements that we would like to have, and a final statement on the research priorities for the ESP. So now that we've talked about the main elements of the ESP, I want to talk a little bit about how the ESP information fits into our management process. So this is a schematic of our annual harvest specification process for the North Pacific and how the different data streams of ecosystem and socioeconomic data can be used to inform this process. On the left, you have the stock assessment model, and that includes fishery data, research, survey data, and in some cases, there's already ecosystem data in the model. Not very many cases, but some. That model is used to generate the maximum acceptable biological catch. And then that's evaluated through review in the groundfish and crab plan teams, and then a secondary review through our scientific and statistical committee. And then that evaluation goes to the council, where they set the final ABC, and the council sets the TAC. So in these areas, the ecosystem information can be, like I said before, used in a contextual manner after the recommendation has been provided from the model, or it can also be put into the model through an ecosystem linked assessment. Socioeconomic information can be used, the fishery performance information can be used directly in the model if it's deemed to be important for selectivity. And then it can, the social and the economic information can be used to inform the council when they're setting the TAC. And so far, the ESP has been used to provide advice along three main categories of risk, rebuilding, and readiness. The summary recommendations at the end of the ESP report are mainly used in a contextual manner to identify additional uncertainties that are not already accounted for in the stock assessment. Those recommendations help determine the level of concern in the ecosystem or fishery performance column of what we are calling risk tables. These are tables that have been added to the SAFE reports for our groundfish stocks, and they're used to clarify the basis for any potential reduction from max ABC or our acceptable biological catch. The risk tables could also be used as a way to document changes that do not warrant higher levels of precaution, and maybe that's an effort to make those risk tables more neutral. Ecosystem indicators in the ESPs are also being used to support the results of a breakpoint analysis in defining productivity regimes, and that's for developing rebuilding plans in our crab stocks. And then finally, as we develop the ESP more and use it as an on-ramp for testing ecosystem linkages, the ESP becomes a tool that fisheries scientists and managers can use to evaluate indicators for readiness in the operational stock assessment, and also as an early warning system for extreme change. So together, these three elements allow for more informed decisions and they increase the readiness of our stock assessment enterprise. All right, now I want to quickly review the timeline of recommendations we've received through our council process on the ESPs. We initiated the concept in 2014 as a way to overhaul a section that was in our SAFE reports on ecosystem considerations. At that point, the Groundfish Plan team, or GPT on the slide, requested we create a working group and trial a stock for that next year. In 2015, we created that working group, started utilizing the data collected from our national initiatives to inform the ESP process. Then in 2016, the Groundfish Plan team recommended producing ESPs for more stocks, and we also wanted to include the Crab Plan team in that process. We produced the first ESP in 2017 as an appendix in the Alaska Sablefish SAFE report. That was then reviewed by our SSC, who suggested the authors should test and evaluate ecosystem linkages within the ESP, and they also provided a lot of sablefish specific comments. Then in 2018, we started getting feedback to expand the socioeconomic data sections and provide recommendations in the workshops, which I'll talk about in a second, or probably a few minutes. In 2019, the SSC provided input on how the ESP can coordinate with other EBFM efforts. They also requested to expand our community information and provide crab and Gulf pollock specific comments. And then finally this year, that's where the SSC recommended the aggregate scoring method to compare to stock history, and they supported development of the ESPs, including uncertainty and a commitment to this process, and that leads to incorporating ecosystem linkages in the SAFE. There's also a lot of support for a new data accessibility option for the ESP, and I'll get to that in a bit. So as I was thinking about this, the response progression from our SSC and plan teams over the years, I thought it was particularly interesting that the implementation of this process and associated product occurred in a series of stages that basically goes from initialization through the final product. And, you know, I think it's useful for people to see that because the communication of this kind of thing does take a long time. And of course, as you go through that process, you have a variety of emotional responses that I've certainly gone through over the last several years. But it's interesting to see how we can implement something like this and how long it takes and sort of the feedback that happens when you go through your council process. Okay, so next I'll briefly summarize some developments of the ESPs. In 2018, we were funded by our center's regional work plan process to conduct a series of 3 workshops, and that was to develop and implement the ESPs for the Alaska Center. Those workshops were intended to allow for awareness, innovation, and collaboration across multiple divisions at the Alaska Center and with other centers, agencies, and universities. And I'll briefly review those in a little bit. We also have been developing the ESP data and documents and coordination. We've initiated new data accessibility options stemming off the ESP data list, which we got in the workshops. We now have 5 ESP teams to help develop and conduct the ESPs. This includes sablefish, Gulf pollock, our 3 Pacific cod stocks, crab, and a data limited team. The teams are created from the lead stock assessment author suggesting people to have for different subject matter experts. And then we also have an ESR contact and an economic safe contact in all the teams. We also now have 2 reporting templates for full and partial ESPs following our SAFE guidelines. For 2020 ESPs, we have 3 new full ESPs for Pacific cod and red king crab, and then we have 3 partial ESPs for sablefish, Gulf pollock, and blue king crab, as those were full ESPs completed last year. And then per SSC requests, we've also been coordinating a bunch with the other EBFM efforts that are being conducted at our center over many levels. So I'll go over a brief review of the ESP workshop. This infographic demonstrates the plan for each workshop. And when you look at the presentation later, there's a link in the year that's underlined for both the data and model workshops that you can look at the agenda for each of those in the appendices to that document. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank all the participants of those workshops, many who I think are online right now. It's been really exciting to see the level of participation grow in the workshops and the willingness of people to help with conducting them. So that's been really, really great. In the first data workshop, we conducted that in May of 2019. We reviewed the ESP process. We collected metadata on available metrics and indicators, and that's what I was referring to as the ESP data list. And then we coordinated personnel for contributing to the ESPs and created an initial list of stocks and timelines for conducting ESPs. In the second model workshop, we just had that in March, we reviewed any ESPs already created and council recommendations. And then we discussed available modeling applications for use in the ESPs. We reviewed simple and importance indicator analyses and conducted a separate discussion workshop in September, several weeks ago, to improve issues with that process. Then in the third advice workshop, which will be held next spring, we plan to provide an update on the current ESPs and any recommendations, review forecasting applications, evaluate the ESP process as a whole, and determine the best way to provide recommendations for management advice. So this is just a look at all the presentations from the first workshop, where we heard from many different programs at the Alaska Center, also the Alaska region, and several other agencies like the International Pacific Halibut Commission and Alaska Department of Fish and Game. And they provided information on their data availability and how we might use that data for contributing to the ESPs. This workshop was in person, and it's allowed a lot of collaboration between many different scientists, and actually it served really well to provide an organization chart for our center, which a lot of people didn't know. So it was really a really great workshop to get everyone together and to kick it off. The second workshop was called the model workshop, and that allowed for building awareness on various modeling applications for developing sort of value-added indicators for the ESPs, and also modeling for within the ESP analysis stages that I reviewed earlier. Unfortunately, the discussion sessions were limited due to the start of COVID-19, but we included live polling to assist with a lot of the remote participation, and we also had an additional workshop. And so because of the loss of discussion from the first workshop in March, we held a one-day follow-up discussion workshop at the end of September. And we also conducted a survey to capture the participants' thoughts on how to conduct this workshop. The main requests were to talk about how indicators were selected for an ESP and then how to move them into the model. We also had 2 other discussion sessions on how the role of socioeconomics in the ESPs and coordination of our EBFM efforts. So to kick off that discussion workshop, we use this visualization of 2 gates as a way to frame the discussion on how to get indicators into an ESP and then how to get them into the model. The first gate is more of a filtering exercise using the ESP teams. So I used a traffic narrowing image there. And the second gate is more of a gate feature that requires passing diagnostics to be used in a model. But I think as the discussion went, we also thought it was important to note there's 2 pathways for that ultimate goal of management advice. And I sort of depict those by the holy grails. But one is the standard way, you know, through the operation, through getting your indicator in the operational model. And the other is by actually remaining in the ESP and providing advice through that whole analysis and monitoring indicators that way. And so that whole part is actually the primary subject of the next ESP workshop. But we use this discussion session as a way to start that conversation and provide input to start with for our next spring workshop. Okay, I'll also go into one of our other developments, and that's on ESP data accessibility. That started with the data list that we generated in the 2019 workshop. There were about 130 plus indicators or data sets entered from many of the programs, and lots of the potential data sets didn't really have a home. And when I mean that, they were not in a relational database. And also many indicators listed were spatial or temporal subsets of the ESR indicators that we don't see in the ESR report. So we decided to initiate with the Alaska Fisheries Information Network, or ACFIN, to improve access to these data streams. We started by creating a tab, if you will, on our stock assessment dashboard, and that's a data management system that we use to get a lot of the other data for our stock assessments. We thought that was a good place to start. It's increasing the visibility of a lot of these other data, these ecosystem data sets, and it could provide access to them on a scheduled manner, as that's how we set it up for our surveys and the catch information. That work was funded through the regional work plan. Also, Jordan Watson and I submitted a proposal to the Fisheries Information System to get funding to continue that project for the next year. So I just wanted to show you a screenshot of the dashboard so far. There's 3 main sections: the ecosystem for ecosystem data, socioeconomic data, and a section for exploratory analyses. And then the categories are listed within each of those sections. So the ecosystem has categories of oceanographic, lower trophic, and upper trophic. And socioeconomics has categories of fishery performance, economics, and community. And then the exploratory section has surveys, laboratory, and modeling. And the modeling section may have links to other websites because a lot of those models have been developed separately, and they have their own relational databases and websites for data access. Also, I don't have that in this screenshot, but we have updated it a little bit so that we have the current ESPs listed at the top of the page, and then we have a link to the indicators currently used in those ESPs. So finally, I wanted to go over a bit on how we are coordinating with other EBFM efforts. Here's the annual time step of creating an ESP. First, during the harvest specification process, there's a recommendation to conduct an ESP, and that occurs in October for the crab stocks and December for the groundfish stocks. And then we create expert teams in the winter. We do the metric and indicator assessment through group assignments and consensus, and that happens in the spring for the crab stocks and summer for the groundfish stocks. Then we draft the ESP in May and September for crab or groundfish, and we finalize them and append them to the SAFE in September and November. That process repeats every year, and if you've done a full ESP, then generally you'll do a partial ESP the following year, and the next time you would do a full ESP would be by request or when the author decides, and that may be because something is changing dramatically. So within that annual timeline, there's a whole lot of reports created in our process, and we needed to be really careful to avoid redundancy with what goes into each of the reports. So here's the table showing the ecosystem status report, the economic safe, the ESP, and our safe chapters. And it shows the different aspects of the report and how they all fit together. And essentially, the ESR and the Econ Safes are a large-scale community summary of what's going on in our region. And the ESPs and the safe chapters are the stock-specific versions. And you can see that's how they fit together very well. And we can use this table to kind of avoid duplication of efforts and increase efficiency on what is going into each of these reports, which is what the SSC has requested us to do. And then finally, we've started an EBM coordination working group at the Alaska Center, and that's to better understand how many of the different EBM efforts are there and how they support the council processes. This graphic is sort of a starter on developing a website to better communicate those interactions. And in this example, we're showing a popped out version of the annual specs process, and that's also including the main reporting products that I just talked about and how they feed into each other. A lot of them feed into the ESPs and the safe chapters. And all the potential interactions require coordination, and that's so that we avoid that redundancy. So toward this goal, the ESR, Econ, and ESP editors have started coordinating indicator contributions where the spatial or temporal subsets of an ESR and Econ indicator can be created for an ESP. We've also designated ESR and Econ representatives on the ESP teams to help with the documents and reduce overlap on the reports. We anticipate more will be built off these initial efforts, such as increased data access and also the standardized contribution. And so this is just a first look at this, and we'll be including some of these other council processes and the different elements of them in the website graphic. All right, next steps. We're going to have our advice workshop in the spring 2021. And from all three workshops, we're going to create technical memorandums to summarize the minutes and sort of the main takeaways from each of those workshops. We're going to continue with developing our dashboard on ACFIN and increasing access to the ecosystem data and socioeconomic data. We've also thought about maybe creating a standard suite of indicators, and that would be following potentially the ecosystem context for stock advice reports that the Northeast Center produces. I thought those were very, very useful. And we finally want to automate our full and partial reporting templates, and that's to increase efficiency as we get more and more ESPs. And then two manuscripts are planned for. The first one is for an ESP introduction. That one's in review right now, in internal review. And then we will have a manuscript that summarizes the workshops and kind of what we got out of them as a center. And hopefully that could be used in other areas if they wanted to implement the ESPs there too. So if we could do all of that, we can complete this communication loop between the three main areas of the assessment process. And now with the three products of the SAFE, the ESR, and the ESP, we move closer towards that ecosystem-based fisheries management. And with that, that's it. And I'll take any questions. And my contact's there at the bottom if you'd like to email me. Or I think Katie will see if we have any questions.
Yes, thank you so much. Okay, we have a couple questions that came in. I'm going to start off with the first one, came in a little bit ago. How has COVID affected the ability to gather data during the 2020 season?
It's been really challenging. I actually had a different slide that I didn't include here because we canceled all our surveys this year. We were able to pull off a few. We had a long line survey where we were able to get observers on there and get that run. So some of the ecosystem indicators that come off of that survey, and of course the information for the stock assessment, were completed. But COVID's been really challenging to get the data. So we've also started to get creative and looked more at, we've always looked at satellite indicators for some of these, but we're looking more into our ROMs and MPZ modeling. It's kind of timely because I guess in our region in the Eastern Bering Sea, we've just operationalized that model, so it's up to date. And that's been the main drawback from using that kind of information. Also, the data assimilation needs to be increased, but I think by using what's got high skill right now, which is what we're doing in our PCOD ESPs this next month, and we've done that in the crab ESP that happened in September, we're showing that we can use some of this information, but we still need the information from the process studies to make sure those models are correct, and we have confidence in using that output. So it's good. It's in a way it's stimulated some creativity. I try to look on the bright side of some of this. We did lose a lot of the updates for the indicators, but it shows how important they are and that they're not just used for stock assessments, they're used for ecosystem assessment and evaluation as well. One of the main things that was an issue was that we had to move our workshops from in-person to nearly all virtual. The March workshop was a bit of a pivot because that's when all of this stuff went down, and I didn't really know how to do that just yet, but we were able to make it work. We used online polling within the workshop, and I just had a lot of wonderful rapporteurs that were monitoring all the areas that people could provide feedback on. And then we got better at it for the September workshop, and we were able to pull off a discussion. But it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of planning and pre-thought to make sure that happens. So yeah, it's a challenge, but you make it work.
Thank you so much. Okay, our next question. On your management process slide, is the ecosystem information used in models and ABC determination coming from ESRs? Would that be replaced by ESPs?
So right now, I'm thinking about this question, but right now I think the ESR indicators are generally used as context because mostly they're not stock specific. They're kind of the large marine ecosystem scale. There have been some indicators that were in our ESR reports that were stock specific, and that our SSC has, once we created the ESPs, the SSC said move those to the ESP and evaluate them there. So I think that's your question, if the ESPs replace what's in the ESRs. ESRs still exist because they're that large marine view, and we still evaluate what's happening in them and put that into the context of the ESP. So we try our best to include that information. And then we make a stock specific version in some cases for the indicators we evaluate. I hope that answered the question.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any further questions. Peg, do you have any questions while we let everyone think and type?
No, I don't have any at this point, Kalei or Katie. Excellent presentation. Thank you so much. If folks do have questions, there's Kalei's email to follow up with her if you'd like to directly, and I appreciate your willingness to do that, Kalei.
Oh yeah, definitely. I did want to say this process is developing, and we are learning as we go a little bit. So the question on moving indicators into the model, that's where we're at right now. We're trying to decide what tests to have, what diagnostics to have. As far as I know, I haven't seen this standardized in any region. So we're kind of in new territory. And I know there's lots of tests and diagnostics that you can use. It's just which is the suite that we want to use for our area, and how do we want to vet them. And that's where we're going for our next workshop. And so if you'd like to listen in, because I think that one will also be virtual, please contact me, and you're welcome to listen to that if you have interest in these. Yeah.
Do you have one last? Oh,
I was going to say, Kalei, are those workshops accessible or recorded in any way? You may have said that. I'm sorry, I missed it.
No, I didn't say that. We didn't record it. We were learning how to run a fully virtual workshop for the first one. The very first one was in person, so we did not record that. The second one, yeah, we were pivoting pretty quickly because that was March and the world was a firestorm. So we haven't recorded it. I think we might try to figure out how to record the third one, but also I have all the minutes, and those are being written up in our tech memos. So to the best of our ability, we will have all that available. And I think that most of the presenters were okay. I'll have to, figure that out, but they were okay with providing their presentations. There's quite a lot of them, and they're really neat to look through and sort of just get a flavor for what's being done at the Alaska Center. So I think as long as everyone's okay, in the tech memo, I'll provide links to those presentations and that they'd be accessible online.
Right,
Okay,
Kalei.
thanks.
We have sorry, Peg, we have two more questions. You mentioned many people being involved, but what kind of size is the team that has developed this process?
So there's lots of levels of teams, which makes my head spin sometimes. But the planning team for like our ESP workshops is 5 people, and that includes an ESR editor that's been pretty critical to making those happen at our center. And then the individual stock teams that are for each stock, we created them for sablefish first, and then Gulf pollock, and then we decided to make a bigger team for Pacific cod because all those stocks were happening at the same time, the ESPs. That varies from about, I'd say, 5 people to 14 or 15, something like that. And so we try to have subject matter experts in each of the teams, and that's kind of led by the stock assessment author, the lead, and how what things they want to concentrate on for their ESP. And then we definitely try to have an ESR editor and an econ safe editor so that we capture what's in those reports and we're not repetitive with that.
Awesome. Are all the team members from the Alaska Fisheries Science Center?
Good question. I think yes, right now they are, but we also have, so I say 5 to 14 editors or team members, but then we also have those people reaching out to contributors, and the contributors range from 10 to 20 or 25 people. So if you look at the documents, you'll see like the list of editors, which usually is the team, and then you'll see the contributors, which is a much bigger list, and those are the people that we reach out to from other agencies or universities for the indicators, because we don't collect all the information at the center, and we want to include the best that we've got. So that's how other people do get involved.
Awesome. We have one last question, which I have also chatted at you if you would like to read it as well. But the last question is, your ecosystem state metrics seem to be related to oceanographic and lower trophic levels. Maybe I missed something. Are the indicators of the overall status and trends of fish stocks, including community composition?
Oh, yeah. So I think you're referring to that one where I show the graphic from Gulf pollock. That was just the first, like, graphic A. So that the rest of the indicators are also in the same graphic, and I just didn't show that. So yeah, we have indicators going all the way through the adult stage of the stock, and we, in one of the ESPs, we include a community composition for the shelf, for the slope region for sablefish, and I suspect we'll do that for peacod in this next round.
Great, thank you. I think that might be the end of our questions. And if not, as we have repeated several times, you can find her email right below there. Sorry, Kalei. And oh, we do have one more question. I was gonna try and shuffle everyone off. Okay, last question. Have there been any discussions about opening up the online platform to groups outside NIMS, public or NGOs?
Yes, that's a great question. So that dashboard, the one that we have that I showed the screenshot of, is an internal one, but there is an option for Apex reporting through that same data management system. And what I'm hoping to do is, where people are comfortable, because there's a lot of data that people aren't comfortable sharing just yet, but the The ones that people are comfortable with sharing, I'd like to basically do a mirror through the firewall and provide that to the public, whoever wants to see it. So I think that'll work really well because we'll have 2 levels of how you can access data.
Well,
Great.
thanks, Kalei. Thank you so much for that. That was a wonderful presentation and certainly a lot of interest in your work. And congratulations to your team too that's helped you put this together. And
Yeah,
just
they're awesome. I can't do it without them.
you got a great team out there. Well, thanks again. And just a reminder, you can, if you have colleagues that were not able to join us here today, please share this link with them and make sure that they know that they can see Kalei's presentation. Katie, that will be probably what, another 24 hours, 48 hours?
Yep, it'll be up sometime tomorrow, probably in the morning, and everyone can find that on our YouTube or the library's seminars webpage.
Great.
Katie, I have an update of the one I sent you, the presentation. So it's just, there was a few words and the contact information at the end. So I'll just send you another PDF.
Thank you so much. And you're happy to have that shared with anyone who requests your slides?
Sure, yeah.
Okay. Awesome.
Okay, our next presentation, November 10th, same time. It's a Tuesday this time because of the holiday. And it's Dr. Steve Morawski from the University of South Florida who'll be talking about the ecosystem lens for evaluating deep water horizon impacts and the effect on some restoration activities. So please join us again on the 10th. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.